The question is that the bill be read a second time. I call the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And look, it's a real pleasure to speak on the Rural Research and Development Legislation Bill, Amendment Bill 2014. And look, I note the member for Indi's comments, but in working towards my contribution today, I spoke to Australian Wool Innovation. Now, they're over the moon, Madam Speaker, about $100 million. $100 million that needs to be used collaboratively. They welcome the fact that there is money on the table there, that the federal government has invested in research and development that will need to be leveraged. That will need to be leveraged with the private sector and industry, and that will need to be leveraged with also the universities and higher education institutions. Because the essence of this bill is the provision of an extra $100 million over 4 years to the rural and research development corporations, with the clear intention to boost agricultural productivity growth. Indeed, in collaboration that will benefit most of all those people at the farm gate. The bill implements a 2014 budget commitment by this government to change the way that government pays for its membership to international commodity organisations and the regional fisheries management organisations. And we understand that that's a fact of life, Deputy Speaker, when we've inherited a budget mess like we have, Madam Speaker. It also reduces the red tape burden currently imposed on some of the rural research and development corporations. These organisations in turn improve the trading environment for agricultural products by funding activities of benefit to our rural industries and the community in general, including research and development on issues of global significance and, not least of all, Madam Speaker, food security. So most importantly, this bill paves the way for $100 million in additional funding over the next 4 years for Australia's rural research and development corporations that will be leveraged with universities and the private sector. Investment in rural research and development is an important part of the Australian government's policy for a competitive agricultural sector. There is a strong link between research and development and agricultural productivity growth, with the research and development investment delivering productivity returns that far exceed, indeed, the cost of that investment. However, in recent years, the productivity growth of Australian agriculture has slowed somewhat. This additional funding will deliver practical research to help farmers to be more productive and ultimately more profitable. This is funding for on-the-ground research and cutting-edge technologies that support our agriculture, fisheries and forestry industries. It is vital that our Australian farmers and producers remain competitive on the international market, where 2/3 of their product goes. And we should never forget that we are indeed an exporting nation, and that 2/3 of the food and fibre, and more so in the case of fibre, but 2/3 of the food that we produce indeed goes overseas. We expect research and development corporations to form alliances with institutions like the University of Tasmania to develop exciting projects to keep our farmers and rural producers at the forefront of agricultural research. And, Deputy Speaker, that leads me on very much to what I want to focus on today, and that is a project, the National Irrigation RD&E program for Tasmania. And indeed, investment in this space is critical for productivity growth. The Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture is a collaboration between is owned jointly and managed jointly by the University of Tasmania and the Tasmanian state government. The governance of the irrigation and the extension work that is done within TIA is done by an outstanding collaborative group there that represents industry groups such as Marcus McShane from the Tasmanian Farmers and Graziers Association, Alan Barr from the third largest agribusiness in Australia, Roberts Rural Co, and my former boss, Scott Shulg from NRM North, a bike riding colleague, and Richard Gardner, one of my oldest friends who represents the Midlands Water Group. Also Chris Thompson from Macquarie Franklin, indeed a wealth of knowledge in regard to the design and implementation of the irrigation schemes that we're already seeing around Tasmania. David Kay from Rabobank brings a commercial focus to that governance arrangement, and indeed Caroline Brown as well from Dipipwe form a most formidable and competent governance organisation there to support the work that TIA does. TIA Director Holder Meinke and Associate Professor Rowan Nelson are responsible for the National Irrigation RD&E program for Tasmania. And it's about, I guess, if I was to try and summarise exactly what maximising productivity out of irrigation investment in Tasmania really means, it's maximising productivity using the least amount of water and the least amount of energy. And essentially that is what R&D in irrigation is all about. We know that this has a national significance and indeed an international significance, Deputy Speaker, because by 2050 the world will have a population of 9 billion people. And we've got to feed and clothe those people, and that is indeed a challenge. And that challenge is not going to be wholly the responsibility of Australia, and it's certainly not going to be the responsibility of Tasmania, that just simply don't have the capacity there. But indeed, already we've seen in my state $310 million invested by government, the federal government, the Tasmanian government and private investors in irrigation infrastructure across the state. In addition to that, there is another $265 million that has been made in investments on farm, be that through dams or piping, water application systems, be they pivot irrigations or, in the case of some of the more intensive horticulture, drip irrigation systems. 150 gigalitres of additional irrigation water will be available for irrigators when all the planned schemes are brought into operation. And just to put that in context, the irrigation capacity within my home state of Tasmania and the irrigable land is comparable to the Ord River and the Gilbert and Flinders schemes, and one of the most significant investments that this nation has seen in irrigation infrastructure since the mighty Murray and Darling River development. The critical difference here is that Tasmania's expansion of irrigation builds on existing high-value temperate agriculture, which is close to the population centres in my state and close to a ready workforce. Multiple small catchments are managed individually to make sure that they are sustainably governed and indeed managed appropriately on an economic basis, but also a sustainable and environmental basis. There will be over $500 million invested in agricultural irrigation schemes within my state once the Tranche 2 irrigation schemes are delivered, which includes the Southern Highlands scheme in my electorate, the Scottsdale scheme in the electorate of Bass, the Circular Head scheme in the electorate of Braddon, the Swan Valley scheme and the North Est scheme also within the electorate of Lyons. Indeed, the contribution of R&D is significant, and I note the Tasmanian government's ambitious target to increase the value of output at the farm gate for agriculture in my state between now and 2050 from about the $1.2 billion that it is currently annually to exceed $10 billion. It is a very ambitious target that they have set, but as the West report in 2009 suggested that the increases of this magnitude were indeed technically feasible if we focus on those things where Tasmania particularly has a competitive advantage, and that is around high-value horticulture, dairy, where we have a natural competitive advantage in terms of cost of production, being able to produce milk with a lesser amount of grain that is required, viticulture and indeed intensive livestock operations. If 80% of the $10 billion target is to be achieved by irrigated agriculture, the value generated from irrigation water needs to be increased from $3,500 per megalitre to nearly $16,000 per megalitre. So they are enormous challenges, and therefore every bit of R&D that is required to make sure that we can deliver on that potential and that opportunity. Projects, I guess the basis there for some of the projects that we will see and the way that we'll be able to achieve that significant increase in value at farm gate within the agricultural and horticultural sector in the state involves a few major projects around soils and drainage, agronomy and the different varieties that are appropriate for my state in terms of grains or different horticultural crops. The use of precision agriculture is going to be increasingly important. Whole farm system modelling, the value chain and food processing, and indeed extension and education. And probably no better example of, I guess, the importance of education was my own experience in the work that I did before I came to this place, and particularly around price risk management and encouraging the use of forward selling, encouraging the use of futures contracts for wool growers to control one of the variables that they have within their businesses. They can't often, Deputy Speaker, as you'd well understand, control whether it rains or it doesn't rain, but one of the things they can have an impact if they understand. It's a bit like fixing a fence with a set of wire strainers. There's certain jobs you can do with certain tools, and indeed having those skills around understanding what is a good price, an average price or a poor price helps farmers make better decisions, and that comes with education. So many opportunities. The benefits will be enormous. The benefits will be wide-ranging indeed. The expansion of the dairy industry to meet growing world demand through increased pasture production and better utilisation of feed grain, particularly around the expansion of the grains industry. We import a very large proportion of all the grain that's used within the dairy sector is imported into our state, and we're looking at ways of using irrigated grain crops to take some of those yields from about 4 tonnes a hectare, which traditionally is the case in non-irrigated types of grain varieties, to up to 12 tonnes per hectare, which is a significant increase. But that's what we do, and the benefits that flow to the dairy industry as a result of being able to grow more grain in Tasmania indeed are significant. The expansion of intensive horticulture and viticulture, cool climate fruits, vegetables and wines, and I guess the investment that we've made as a government in infrastructure such as extensions to the Hobart Airport, $38 million to extend the Hobart Airport, will give us access for some of those horticultural products increasingly into parts of Asia that at the moment it's difficult to access. And Tasmania has always had a reputation and a capacity to produce and be involved in very high-value specialist plant crops like, for example, opium poppies, a very important industry in my state where there's a real knowledge that's been built up there and that by producers and processors alike, pyrethrum, essential oils, specialty grains and the production of pasture and vegetable seeds as well. So indeed it is an enormous task, and I look forward to seeing the application that no doubt the university and TIA will make through a collaborative approach to, I suspect, the Grains Research and Development Corporation and some of the other research development bodies to, as I said before, R&D when it comes to irrigation essentially means maximising our productivity, using the least amount of water, being smart, being efficient with it, and using the least amount of energy. This is indeed what irrigation R&D is all about. It would be remiss of me, Deputy Speaker, in the small time that I have left to not mention the industry of which I was a part for nearly 25 years, and that's the wool industry. There's some great examples where I guess there has been collaborative investment through AWI as the vehicle, but as the member for Indi said, there's some excellent examples. In the case of Tasmania, it used to be the 8x5 program. It's now the Sheep Connect Tasmania, which through the leading sheep program does work with both MLA and also Australian Wool Innovation to do some really great work, and indeed some of the projects that we're seeing at the moment in Tasmania, the extension network, a staggering 97% of farmers said they would make changes to their business, and that these changes would result in more than $5,000 worth of benefits directly to their business. So there is indeed value in collaboration. I can't speak highly enough about what has been invested by the Minister for Agriculture and the federal government in this $100 million. It will be used smartly. We must make the most of scarce resources in this space. There is no more important issue than productivity and research and development if Australia is going to be competitive into the future in a space that we've always been very strong with, but we cannot rest, Deputy Speaker, on our laurels. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Order. The question is that this bill been